Eleanor Whitmore, 72, retired headmistress and widow of a steelworker, stood at the head of a long oak table with a crystal glass raised, watching her daughter-in-law smile like a knife. I was born in a coal town, taught 3 generations to read, buried 1 husband and 2 sisters, and I keep my promises, especially the ones people think I'm too old to keep. And you should know that before I tell you how Vanessa dared me to die sooner and how the only thing that died was her future, because this is the part where everything catches fire. Honestly, Mama Ellie, Vanessa said, clinking her spoon against the glass so our friends and neighbors would hear, if you insist on dragging out your farewell tour, at least do it with dignity. You're clogging the house with your old books. Her smile glittered for the room, but her eyes held me like thumbtacks pressed into cork. You know that look, don't you? The one people give when they've decided your story is over before you've reached your last sentence. And I wonder, have you ever tasted that flavor of disrespect at your own table? The room went quiet. The roast cooled. The clock with my late husband's initials ticked so loudly I could feel the seconds behind my teeth. My son Mark, 40, flinched. He loved me, but he loved peace more, and peace has a way of hiding inside the most expensive compromise. I could have swallowed it. Old women are expected to swallow. Instead, I lifted my glass and said warmly, "Thank you for your patience, Vanessa. And thank you for bringing your lawyer," nodding at the sleek man in the navy suit near the ficus. Gasps rippled like summer wind across tall grass. Because no one invites a lawyer to Sunday supper without expecting thunder. And doesn't thunder always make you look up? Vanessa's smile thinned. He's family counsel, she said, as if I'd mispronounced a simple word. We're modernizing the deed and the trust. Streamlining. We can't have assets stuck in storage while things linger. The way she said things told the room my life was a cluttered hallway blocking her future. Do you hear how pretty cruelty sounds when it wears a pearl necklace? I looked at Mark. He couldn't hold my gaze. Grief, guilt, and ambition tugged his eyes in 3 directions. For a year I'd watched them whisper in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. For a year I'd listened to their plans, traveling under the floorboards like mice. I'm not going anywhere, I said, setting down the glass. And neither is this house until I say so. In the corner, my neighbor Ruth, who still wore her hair like a victory flag from 1978, clutched her chest and mouthed a word that felt like amen and alarm stitched together. Tell me, have you ever felt the ground shift in your own hallway while wearing your softest slippers? Vanessa laughed lightly for the crowd. But you said you were tired, Mother. You said the stairs hurt and the winters dragged. It's not about you dying. It's about you not lingering. Isn't that what you said? She patted my hand the way people pat a dog they don't want to adopt. That word, lingering, landed on the table like a dead fly, wings up. I taught children never to use words they wouldn't say to a mirror, because language is a boomerang, and haven't you learned it always finds its way back? The lawyer cleared his throat, and a folder, with my surname stamped in silver, glided from his briefcase. We can do this amicably, he said. Transfer primary residence, establish survivorship, convert certain liquid assets to a growth vehicle. Vanessa has an exceptional eye for markets. He smiled as if he were suggesting lemon bars for dessert. And I thought of all my girls who stood up to bullies on playgrounds with nothing but scraped knees for armor. Gentlemen, I said, because men called gentlemen sometimes remember they were raised by women like me. Would you please read the first page aloud? Have you noticed how fear grows quiet where confidence takes a chair? He hesitated, then read. Addendum to the Whitmore Trust. Triggered upon any party's expressed wish for the settlers' accelerated demise. He stopped. The room inhaled. Ruth's fork clinked against her plate like a bird trying to escape a window. The lawyer blinked. This is not. It is, I said, sliding my reading glasses down. My handwriting and a notarized seal from Mr. Hayes at the bank. Do continue. He swallowed. Upon which event the principal residence passes to the Whitmore Adult Literacy Fund. All investment accounts fund a scholarship for single mothers, and any individual advocating the settler's premature passing is barred from fiduciary roles for a period of 30 years. His voice cracked on 30. Have you ever watched a wolf realize the sheep was carrying a whistle? Vanessa's cheeks flushed a precise, expensive crimson. This is absurd. You can't. I can, I said, and I did. Last spring. When you stood in my kitchen and said, wouldn't it be kinder for everyone if you left sooner? And then asked about the password to my brokerage account. The crowd shifted, a flock uneasy on a wire. I baked lemon bars while you said it. I wrote after you left. And now we are here. Sometimes survival is just a good ear and a steady pen. And do you see why I tell my granddaughters to name the monster out loud? Mark stood, knuckles white on his chair. Mom, she didn't mean. She meant every syllable, I said. But I'm not here to punish. I'm here to clarify. I lifted a second envelope. This one is for tonight. A temporary transfer. Backdated, notarized. Until respect returns to my table. This house belongs to the library 2 blocks down. They've already sent their thank you note. Ruth made a sound like church and fireworks. It wasn't cruelty that guided my hand. It was curriculum design, the same principle that kept me after class with a stubborn student until their mouth learned the shape of a new truth. And don't we all need remedial lessons in kindness now and then? A chair scraped. Vanessa rose, chin high. You won't get away with humiliating me. You don't know who you're dealing with. Her voice trembled on the last word, and I remembered she was once a girl in a green cardigan, probably told she was brilliant only when she won, never when she was kind. Sit, I said softly, and let's all behave like heirs worth inheriting anything. Soft can be sharper than steel if you use it right, and haven't you learned that from your own grandmother's hands? She didn't sit. She reached for the folder. I slid it back. The lawyer took a step, then stopped, because in the doorway under the portrait of my late husband stood Mr. Hayes the banker, small as a comma and twice as important. Evening, he said, tapping the seal with a finger. All proper, all legal. Mrs. Whitmore, as requested. Timing is punctuation for life. Put it in the right place and the sentence lands, and do you feel the landing in your ribs right now? Vanessa's smile returned but lost its teeth. Fine, she said. You want drama, you can have it. But when this goes public, when people see how you treat family, your legacy will be a cautionary tale. She pivoted to the room. My niece Hannah, my neighbor Ruth, my church choir and the mailman I always tipped at Christmas, and opened her hands like a morning show host. Behold, the matriarch who gives her home to strangers because her feelings were hurt. She wanted a jury, she got a congregation. Which one do you fear more? Strangers with gavels or neighbors with memories? I set my palm on the table and felt the grooves my husband carved decades ago. My feelings aren't hurt, I said. They're well educated. And my will isn't a weapon. It's a syllabus. Then I looked at Vanessa and gave her the first true kindness I'd offered all night, the truth shaped like a doorway. You dared me to die sooner, I said. But what ends tonight isn't my life. It's the future you were plotting on the bones of my name. Her pupils shrank like black stars. She took a step back, like a dancer who's missed her mark and knows the stage edge is near. And can't you almost hear the orchestra hold the note? Mr. Hayes coughed gently. Shall I record the activation, Mrs. Whitmore? Yes, I said. Activate the addendum. I turned to the room and smiled the way a teacher smiles at the bell. Warm, inevitable. As of now, the house is the library's. I'll keep my bedroom as their tenant until the angels or the good Lord decide otherwise. Vanessa, darling, I added, you're invited to learn the difference between possession and stewardship. The word stewardship floated like a lantern. Some people reach for light, others reach for scissors. Which one would you grab in the dark? Vanessa's hand swiped the edge of the folder, knocked her wine across the linen, and for one reckless heartbeat it looked as if she meant to shove me. Mark's breath snagged. Ruth tensed. Mr. Hayes blinked very slowly, the way men who've seen too many signatures sometimes do. I did not flinch, because I am a woman who has stood in the doorway of a middle school bathroom at 3 p.m. on a Friday. Go ahead, I said softly, and add a salt to inheritance in your scrapbook. Her hand froze midair like a bird deciding whether the window is open. Have you ever watched a person calculate the cost of the next second? And that's when the front door swung wide and the news crew's light washed the foyer, because somewhere between lemon bars and legalese, Ruth had texted her nephew at Channel 8 about a living will lesson, and I'd told Ruth earlier that if decency failed, sunlight would do, and now the sunlight had brought a camera with it. "Mrs. Whitmore," the reporter called, breathless. "We heard you're making a gift to the town library. Can we ask why tonight?" I met Vanessa's eyes and saw the math collapse. She had brought a lawyer to frame me. I had brought a classroom to witness us both. And as the red light blinked on, I opened my mouth to speak, to tell our town what we owe the elders who built our steps and the children who'll climb them after. In the exact second Vanessa made her choice and stepped forward toward me, fingers curled, eyes bright as broken glass. And if you're leaning in right now, good, because what she said next will set the fuse you think you've already seen burn. Vanessa's lips parted, and the words that slid out were like venom wrapped in honey. "Why don't you just die already, Eleanor? You've lived long enough, and all you're doing now is standing in the way of our future." The room turned to stone. Mark gasped, Ruth dropped her fork, and the young reporter at the door froze with his camera half raised. I felt every syllable strike me, sharp as the winter wind that blew through this very house when my husband died 30 years ago. But I did not collapse. No, I stood taller because sometimes when a storm comes, the oak tree doesn't bend. It shows the storm its roots. "Say it again," I whispered, my voice steady but sharp as chalk screeching across a board. The words hovered between us like smoke from a fire only I could smell. Haven't you ever stood in a room where someone showed you their true face, and suddenly the air itself turned poisonous? Vanessa's eyes flicked to the lawyer, then back at me. For a moment, she seemed to realize what she had unleashed. But pride is a dangerous leash. It drags you even when you want to retreat. "You heard me," she snapped. "You're clinging to this house, this money, this life like it's eternal. But nothing is eternal. And you're making us wait." She said us, but her eyes were all about herself. That's when I knew. This wasn't about family. It was about her throne, a crown she thought was already waiting for her head. Mark shifted uneasily, sweat lining his forehead. "Vanessa, enough," he whispered. But it was too late. The words had left her mouth, and once a curse is spoken, you can't call it back, can you? I took a slow breath, steadying the fire building inside me. "You dared me to die sooner," I said clearly, my voice rising just enough for the entire room, for the neighbors and the cameras to hear. "But what you've just killed, Vanessa, isn't me, it's your future." And the look on her face when I said it. Oh, you should have seen it. Like a gambler who realized too late that she had bet the very roof over her head. The camera light flickered on. The reporter's pen scratched against his notepad. Suddenly, this wasn't just family business anymore. This was history in the making. And history, once written in ink or light, cannot be erased. Do you feel that shift, the one where a private betrayal becomes a public lesson? Vanessa's smile wavered, but she doubled down, her pride refusing to let her retreat. "We'll see about that," she hissed, grabbing her wine glass and raising it high. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "To the end of an era." The glass slammed against the table, red wine splashing across the linen like spilled blood. Gasps rose from every corner of the room. I didn't flinch. I simply folded my hands, the way I used to do at morning assembly when disciplining unruly students, and said softly, "Be careful what you toast to, child. Sometimes the universe hears and answers quicker than you expect." And then, as the cameras rolled, I leaned forward and slid the second envelope across the table toward her, the one even Mark didn't know existed. Her hand stopped midway, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof," I said calmly, my heart steady as a drumbeat, "that I am not the one who needs to fear the future." Her fingers hovered over the flap, her nails clicking lightly against the paper, the way a match trembles just before it sparks. And as she slowly tore it open, silence fell so heavy that you could hear the clock tick, hear the reporter's breathing, hear the storm gathering outside. Because inside that envelope was the truth she had been running from all year, truth sharp enough to tear down every dream she had built on my grave. And when her eyes landed on the first line of that document, She froze as if she had just seen her own reflection in a coffin's glass. What she read next made her lips part in horror. And I'll tell you exactly what it was, but not yet, because first, you need to understand how we even got here. You need to know the beginning of this story, so you'll understand why the end unfolded the way it did. Before the wine spilled, before the lawyer's folder, before Channel 8's camera light turned my dining room into a stage, there were simpler days. Back then I was just Eleanor Whitmore, teacher, widow, grandmother. I never imagined my own son's wife would one day look me in the eye and tell me to die. It started with kindness, as betrayal so often does. When Mark brought Vanessa home 15 years ago, she was 22, pretty as a porcelain doll, with ambition blazing in her eyes. I remember thinking, at last, someone who will cherish my boy and maybe even sit with me in the evenings to knit or share recipes. Tell me, haven't you ever mistaken sharpness for sparkle, believing firelight would warm you when in truth it was waiting to burn? The first years were calm. Vanessa would bring me flowers, call me Mama Ellie, and smile so sweetly that even Ruth, my skeptical neighbor, admitted she might be the blessing Mark needed. But as years passed, her sweetness curdled. The flowers stopped. The smiles turned brittle. And the little jabs began. "Oh, Mama Ellie, don't you think that hairstyle is too old-fashioned? Maybe you should downsize. Big houses can overwhelm seniors." Each comment carried a seed, and those seeds were weeds, creeping slowly through my peace. Still I endured. I reminded myself that marriage is hard, that Vanessa had grown up poor and perhaps clung too tightly to security. I even gave her the benefit of the doubt when she offered to help me sort my finances. But then I noticed how often my son avoided eye contact when she spoke, how his laughter thinned when she reached for his arm. Haven't you seen love shrink under the weight of someone else's greed? The breaking point came one frosty December night. I'd gone to the kitchen for a glass of water and overheard them in the living room. Vanessa's voice was sharp as glass. "We're wasting time, Mark. Every month she lingers, that's money tied up. Do you want our children to inherit debt instead of fortune?" My son's voice cracked. "She's my mother." But Vanessa pressed on. "And one day she'll be your memory. The sooner the better. You know it, and I know it." I stood in the dark, clutching my water glass so tight it nearly shattered. My heart broke, not from her cruelty, but from my son's silence. Because silence, when you expect defense, cuts deeper than a knife. Have you ever learned in one moment that the person you trusted most would not stand between you and the wolf at the door? That night I wept into my pillow. But in the morning my tears hardened into resolve. I was not raised to be prey. My mother taught me that a woman may lose her youth, her beauty, even her husband, but she must never lose her dignity. And dignity, I realized, meant preparing for the day when those who claim to love you sharpen their teeth behind your back. So I visited the bank. I called Mr. Hayes, the old notary who had watched me save pennies for Mark's college tuition decades ago. I asked about clauses, trusts, and the law's quiet ways of protecting the vulnerable. And I began to write. Not a will for the dead, but a syllabus for the living. A plan to teach my family, especially Vanessa, that life is not about inheritance, but about character. I wrote an addendum, hidden like a seed under spring soil, waiting for the right storm to bloom. And I waited, patient as winter, watchful as dawn. Because patience, dear one, is a sharper weapon than rage. Rage burns fast. Patience burns clean. Do you understand that? Mark visited often, but his visits carried the heaviness of someone caught between loyalty and fear. He would sit at my kitchen table, stirring his tea until the sugar dissolved, saying nothing of the storm brewing in his own house. I wanted to shake him, to remind him of the boy who once defended smaller children from bullies on the playground. But sometimes sons become men who forget their courage, and mothers must find it for them. Vanessa, however, became bolder. She began dropping hints at family gatherings. "Mama Ellie, when you're gone, we'll keep the piano just where it is." Or, "This house will look stunning with a remodel, once it's ours." She said these things casually, with a laugh, but her eyes always flicked toward me, measuring my reaction. And every time I smiled politely, storing each insult in my heart like stones in a sling. One spring evening she slipped. She poured herself a glass of wine and muttered, perhaps forgetting I was nearby, "Why doesn't she just die already?" The words weren't meant for me to hear, but I heard them clear as church bells. That was the night I decided the lesson would no longer wait. And so when the lawyer arrived at my table months later, when the cameras rolled, when Vanessa dared me aloud to die sooner, she thought she was holding the knife. But what she didn't know was that I had already written the ending. I had already sharpened my chalk into steel. Because here's the truth I want you to remember. Betrayal doesn't always come with a scream. Sometimes it walks in wearing heels, carrying flowers, smiling as it sharpens the blade behind its back. And when it shows its face, you must be ready, not to cry but to teach. That's why I slid the second envelope across the table. That's why Vanessa's hands trembled as she opened it. And when her eyes read what was inside, she didn't just see words. She saw her future collapse like a house built on sand. But you must be wondering now, what exactly did that envelope contain? What truth was sharp enough to silence a woman like Vanessa? Well, child, lean closer. Because what she found inside wasn't just paperwork. It was a revelation so devastating that the very ground beneath her ambition cracked wide open. When Vanessa's manicured fingers slit open the envelope, the entire room seemed to lean with her. Even the clock on the mantelpiece slowed, as though it too wanted to witness her undoing. She pulled out the papers, her eyes scanning the first lines, and in an instant her face drained of color. The smirk she always wore as armor crumbled, leaving her bare, raw, and suddenly very small. Because what she was staring at was not a deed, not a will, not another clause designed to lock her out of my estate. No, it was a document bearing her name. Proof. Receipts. Letters. Copies of text messages and bank transfers she thought long buried. All of it signed, sealed, notarized. And every piece told the same story. She had been siphoning money, quietly, from the joint account she shared with Mark. She thought no one noticed the missing thousands here and there. But I noticed. Haven't you ever caught a shadow moving where it shouldn't, and known it was only a matter of time before it showed its face? Vanessa's lips parted in horror. Where did you get these? Her voice cracked, high and sharp, like glass splintering under pressure. She looked around the room, desperate to find someone, anyone to defend her. But the lawyer stared at the floor. Mark rubbed his temple in shame, and the reporter's camera light glared brighter, hungry for scandal. I got them, I said calmly. The same way I've gotten everything in my life, through observation, patience, and a refusal to be fooled twice. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You see, child, while you were plotting to bury me, you forgot I taught generations of children how to spot liars. Do you think I wouldn't spot one in my own home? She flung the papers down, but the damage was done. The words had already been seen. The evidence was already public. Gasps filled the room. And Mark. Oh, my poor Mark. He sat there as though his entire chest had been split open, realizing that the woman he defended for years had been robbing him blind. Haven't you ever seen a man's love shatter before your very eyes? It's a painful thing, painful but necessary. Vanessa tried to recover, tried to laugh it off. This is manipulation. She's staging this. She's jealous, she's bitter, Her voice shook, and for the first time, the edges of her confidence frayed. I watched her grip the chair for balance, her carefully built facade collapsing like sandcastles against a rising tide. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The only thing I'm bitter about, I said softly, is that I let you into this family without testing your spirit first. That was my mistake. But tonight the test is done and the results are in. And Vanessa. I paused, letting her meet my eyes. You failed. The words landed heavier than any scream could have. She froze, her shoulders trembling, her jaw tight. Around us, neighbors shifted uncomfortably. The choir ladies exchanged knowing looks, and Ruth, bless her, whispered under her breath, Amen. The lawyer finally cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, this is damning evidence. He hesitated. Do you want to pursue charges? Vanessa's head whipped toward me, panic flaring in her eyes. Charges? She gasped. You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't ruin your son's life by dragging his wife into court. I looked at her, steady as stone. I wouldn't ruin my son's life. You did that yourself when you chose theft over honesty, greed over loyalty, cruelty over love. My gaze flicked to Mark, who sat frozen, his face pale. His hands clenched so tightly the knuckles gleamed white. But make no mistake, I continued. I will not let you ruin mine. The reporter scribbled furiously, the camera rolling as every word etched itself into the public record. Vanessa's lips trembled, but pride forced her to lift her chin. You think you've won, she whispered bitterly. You think this makes you some kind of hero. But you're just a lonely, bitter old woman clinging to control. And when you're gone, everything will come back to me anyway. I smiled then. Not a cruel smile, not a gloating smile, but the kind of smile teachers give when the lesson is about to hit home. Vanessa, I said gently, you don't seem to understand. Tonight isn't about me leaving anything behind. Tonight is about me reclaiming everything you tried to steal. And as for when I'm gone, I leaned closer, lowering my voice until the whole room had to lean in to hear. When I'm gone, nothing will come to you. Not this house. Not the money. Not the trust. Not even Mark's heart, if you keep walking the path you're on. The only thing waiting for you is emptiness. Her face contorted, torn between rage and fear. She wanted to scream, to claw back control, but the truth had already pinned her down. And everyone watching could see it. She had dared me to die sooner. But the only thing that was dying now was her carefully crafted future. And then, as if fate itself wanted to drive the lesson deeper, the reporter raised his hand. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice trembling with excitement, would you be willing to share a statement for tomorrow's front page? The town should hear what happened tonight. The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, a crossroads between silence and legacy. My heart beat steady, calm, unshaken. And I opened my mouth to speak. Just as Mark suddenly stood, his chair scraping hard against the floor, his face twisted in pain. He opened his mouth, and what came out made the entire room gasp. Mark's voice cracked as he shouted, "Enough!" The force of it shook the room more than Vanessa's insults ever could. His hands trembled, his chest heaved, and for the first time in years, I saw my son's heart spill out bare in front of everyone. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his eyes darting between me and Vanessa. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine. It's not fine. It hasn't been fine in years." The silence that followed was thick as wet cement. Vanessa's jaw dropped, her hand still clinging to the back of her chair as if it were the last thing keeping her upright. "Mark," she whispered, her voice thin, desperate. "What are you saying?" He turned to her, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling. "I'm saying I've been blind. I let you talk me into things, let you chip away at my mother, at my peace, at everything we had. I ignored the warnings, the looks, the quiet things you said when you thought no one was listening. And I let you make me believe it was all for us. But it wasn't for us, was it? It was for you." Vanessa stumbled forward, trying to take his hand. "That's not true. Everything I did for us, for our future, for our family. Don't let her twist this." She jabbed a finger at me, her eyes wide and wild. "She's manipulating you. She's always manipulated you." But Mark stepped back, shaking his head. "No," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "The only person who's manipulated me is you." His words cut sharper than any knife, and the weight of them dropped into the room like an anchor. Haven't you ever watched someone finally open their eyes, only to realize the person they've loved most has been standing in the shadows all along? Vanessa's face twisted, torn between fury and fear. She looked at the neighbors, at the lawyer, at the reporter, as if searching for one ally left in the room. But all she found were lowered eyes and shaking heads. Even the lawyer, who had once walked in with arrogance in his step, now looked like a man wishing he'd chosen another client. I sat quietly, hands folded, watching the lesson unfold without my interference. Sometimes, you see, the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs the right stage, and it will perform on its own. Mark turned to me then, his eyes wet, his voice raw. "Mom. Sorry. I should have defended you. I should have been your shield, not your silence." His words cracked something open in me I hadn't realized was still sore. Years of holding my tongue, of watching him sit silent while Vanessa chipped at me, melted into tears I hadn't expected. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's not too late," I said softly. "The lesson isn't just for her, Mark. It's for you too. You can still choose the man you were raised to be." The room exhaled together, like a choir breathing after a long hymn. For a moment hope flickered. But Vanessa, oh Vanessa, wasn't ready to surrender. Pride is a poison that won't let go once it's sunk its teeth in. She straightened, her face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. "You think you've won, Eleanor," she hissed. "But you don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of." Her voice was low, dangerous, carrying a venom that made even Ruth gasp. Mark stepped between us instinctively, his arms outstretched. "Vanessa, stop. Just stop before you make it worse." But she shook her head, her eyes blazing. "No. If you want war, Eleanor, you'll have it. You're old. Or weak. And you won't always be surrounded by people to protect you. One day when no one's looking, I'll..." She caught herself, biting her lip, realizing too late that the cameras were still rolling, the reporter still scribbling. Every head turned toward her. Her threat had slipped out like a dagger she couldn't sheath. She froze, eyes darting frantically, the enormity of her mistake dawning on her face. Haven't you ever watched someone dig their own grave with words they couldn't swallow back? The reporter lowered his pen, his eyes wide. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said slowly, "did you just hear that?" I nodded, calm as a still pond. We all heard it. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the clinking of glasses as people shifted uneasily. Vanessa's face went pale, then flushed, then pale again, as if every drop of blood in her body couldn't decide where to settle. She had dared me to die sooner. Now, in front of witnesses and cameras, she had spoken her own curse out loud. Mark turned to her, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Did you just threaten my mother? In front of everyone?" His voice cracked with both rage and heartbreak. "Vanessa, what have you done?" She reached for him, desperation finally breaking through her pride. "Mark, no, please, I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. It just slipped out. I was upset. Her words tripped over themselves, frantic, sloppy, unconvincing. But the damage was done. She had exposed herself, not with forged papers or secret bank transfers, but with her very own tongue. And a tongue can damn a future quicker than any pen. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady, my eyes never leaving hers. "Vanessa, you wanted my death to be your freedom. But the only death tonight is your mask. And what's left beneath it is for everyone to see." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed back into her chair, silent for the first time since I'd met her. And just then, the lawyer closed his briefcase with a snap, stood tall, and said words that made Vanessa's head jerk up like a hunted animal hearing the gun cock. The lawyer adjusted his tie. His expression suddenly different, less polished, more cautious, as though he had just realized the ground he was standing on was quicksand. He cleared his throat and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, given the evidence presented tonight, your notarized documents, the financial transfers, and now this threat, I must recuse myself from representing Mrs. Vanessa Whitmore in any matter involving this estate. Effective immediately." The sound of his briefcase snapping shut was like a gavel falling. The entire room gasped, some leaning closer, some stepping back. Vanessa's head whipped toward him, her face contorted with fury. "You can't leave me. We had a contract." The lawyer's lips tightened into a thin line. "I cannot ethically represent a client who may have committed fraud or made a public threat against a living relative whose estate she has a vested interest in. Especially not with media present." He nodded toward the reporter's flashing camera. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're on your own." The color drained from Vanessa's face. She turned to Mark, desperate now. "You see what she's doing. She's poisoning everyone against me. You can't let her do this, Mark. You're my husband. You swore vows. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." But Mark's shoulders sagged, heavy with the weight of years. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "No, Vanessa. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who you are. And I've been too blind, too weak to admit it until now." His words hit harder than the lawyer's departure, harder than the gasps of the room. Because they weren't just words, they were the crumbling of the last wall she had to lean on. Her lips quivered. "You don't mean that." "I do." His voice broke, but his eyes held steady. "You've stolen from me. You've humiliated my mother. And tonight you threatened her. In front of everyone. Do you even realize what you've done?" His voice rose, echoing off the walls. "You've destroyed us. You've destroyed yourself." The neighbors muttered among themselves. Ruth clutched her pearls, whispering, "Lord, have mercy." The choir ladies exchanged sharp nods as if they were in church, watching a sermon unfold. And the reporter scribbled faster, his pen flying across the notepad as though he couldn't capture the moment quickly enough. Vanessa stood trembling, her pride cracking under the weight of her collapsing world. I can fix this," she stammered. "We can move past it. We don't need them. We don't need anyone. Just you and me, Mark. Please." She reached for him, tears finally breaking free, streaking down her face like smudged ink. But Mark pulled away, shaking his head. "You don't get it, Vanessa. You can't fix what you broke with lies and greed. You don't mend betrayal with promises. And you don't erase threats with tears." His words cut her down where she stood. Her knees wobbled, and she sank into her chair as though the very air had grown too heavy for her to bear. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a child who had played with matches and set fire to her own house. I leaned forward then, my voice calm but sharp. "Vanessa, you asked me to die sooner. But what you failed to see is that it wasn't my death standing in the doorway. It was yours. The death of the future you thought you could steal. Tonight your mask is gone. And without it, what remains is for the world to see." The room was so quiet you could hear the steady tick of the mantel clock. Every eye was on her. And every eye saw the same thing. Not a victim, not a wife, but a woman undone by her own ambition. And then, just when I thought the night had reached its final note, Mr. Hayes, the notary, who had been quiet all this time, stood up. His voice was firm, measured, official. "For the record," he said, raising a hand, "I witnessed Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore sign these addendums. They are valid and binding. As of tonight, this estate, house, accounts and assets, is legally shielded from any claim made by Vanessa Whitmore." The gasp that followed was louder than thunder. Vanessa's hand shot to her mouth as though she could shove the truth back inside before it escaped. But it was too late. The verdict had been spoken, the door slammed shut. She shot up from her chair, eyes blazing, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "You've ruined me. Do you hear me, Eleanor? You've ruined me." I stood slowly, my voice calm, unwavering. "No, Vanessa. You ruined yourself. All I did was give you the rope, and you tied your own noose." Her scream pierced the room, a sound of rage and despair mixed into something inhuman. She shoved her chair backward, knocking over a wine glass, red liquid spilling across the floor like the trail of her downfall. And then, without another word, she stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. The room sat in stunned silence. Mark dropped into a chair, covering his face with his hands. Neighbors whispered prayers. The reporter lowered his pen, his face pale with the weight of what he had just witnessed. And me. I stood tall, breathing slow and steady, like a woman who had weathered the storm and was now standing in the calm after. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because a woman like Vanessa doesn't disappear quietly. No, when pride dies it thrashes. And I could feel it in my bones. She wasn't finished. And I was right. Because 2 days later, I opened my front door to find an envelope lying on the mat. An envelope with no return address, just my name scrawled across it in furious, jagged handwriting. And what was inside nearly made my heart stop. The morning was gray, the kind of morning that carries the smell of rain before a drop ever falls. I bent down to pick up the envelope, its edges rough, its paper cheap, as if it had been purchased in haste. My name was scratched across the front in Vanessa's unmistakable hand, each letter jagged, as though carved with anger instead of ink. I brought it inside, my fingers trembling just slightly. You know how sometimes you can feel the weight of danger before you even open the door to it? That was how the paper felt, heavier than it should have been. Sitting at the table where only 2 nights earlier Vanessa's mask had crumbled, I tore it open. Inside were 3 pages. The first was a letter, written in her feverish script. The second and third were photographs. Photographs that made me grip the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles whitened. The letter read, "You think you've won, Eleanor. But this isn't over. You took my future, so I'll take yours. Don't sleep too soundly, because sooner or later, you'll wake up and find out what it means to lose everything. You wanted to make me the villain. Fine. Then I'll be the villain you fear." Her words bled across the page, raw and venomous. But it was the photographs that cut deepest. One showed my back garden, the roses I tended every morning, taken at night. Another showed my bedroom window, curtains half drawn, the faint glow of my lamp spilling out. Someone had been standing outside my house with a camera, watching me. Do you know the terror of realizing your sanctuary has been turned into a stage for someone else's obsession? It is a chilling thing to know that your breaths are being counted, your steps recorded. I pressed the photographs against my chest, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to crumble, to let fear claim me. But then another part, the part of me that raised a son alone, buried a husband, and taught stubborn children for 40 years, rose up. Fear was what Vanessa wanted. Fear was her weapon. And I would not hand it to her. Instead I called Ruth. My neighbor's voice shook when I explained, but she came running, pearl necklace bouncing against her chest. She stood over the photographs, her lips pressed tight. "That girl has lost her mind," she muttered. "This isn't just greed anymore. This is madness." I nodded slowly. And madness, left unchecked, destroys everything in its path. We called the police. An officer came, a young man with kind eyes who looked at me the way my students used to when they needed guidance. He studied the photographs, his jaw tightening. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "this is intimidation. It's harassment. We'll file a report, and I'll recommend a restraining order." But I could see in his eyes what he didn't say. A restraining order is only paper, and paper can't stop someone determined to destroy. That night, I sat in my rocking chair by the window, staring out into the darkness, waiting for a shadow that never appeared. I thought of Vanessa's letter, her vow to become the villain I feared. And I asked myself, was this truly about inheritance anymore, or had greed rotted so deep in her that she simply wanted to see me broken? Mark visited the next morning, his face lined with exhaustion. He had heard about the letter from the officer. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he whispered, his hands shaking as he poured coffee. "I didn't know she was capable of this." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't know who I married anymore." I put my hand over his. "You know exactly who you married, Mark. You just didn't want to admit it. And now you have to choose who you are. Because if you don't stand against her, she will drag you down with her." He nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "Haven't you seen that look before? The look of someone caught between blood and betrayal, loyalty and survival. It is a cruel place to stand." 2 days passed. Then 3. I tried to live as normally as I could, watering my roses, baking bread, humming to myself. But every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow outside my window made me wonder if Vanessa was near. She had promised war, and war never announces its arrival politely. And then on the 4th night I woke to a sound. Faint scratching at the back door. My heart thundered as I sat up in bed, listening. Cratch. Bzz. Cratch. Someone was there. I crept down the stairs, each step groaning beneath my feet, the photographs from the envelope flashing in my mind. I reached the kitchen, my breath shallow. The scratching came again, louder this time. And then, suddenly, silence. I flicked on the porch light, my hand trembling. Nothing. The yard was empty. But on the door, taped with black electrical tape, was another envelope. And inside it was something that made my knees buckle and the world tilt sideways. The envelope was thinner this time, yet it carried a weight that nearly crushed me. My hands trembled as I peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in bold, slashing strokes. Tick-tock, Eleanor. Time is running out. No signature. No explanation. Just those words, and beneath them, clipped neatly to the page, a silver chain I recognized instantly. It was Mark's wedding ring. For a moment the room spun. My son never removed that ring. Not when he showered, not when he slept, not even when he dug trenches in the garden. He wore it like a second skin, like a vow he couldn't shed. And now it was here, in my trembling hands, severed from him. My first thought was fear. Had she hurt him? My second thought was rage. Had he given it to her willingly, still clinging to the woman who threatened me? Both thoughts warred in my chest until my breath came shallow, my vision blurred. Haven't you ever felt that moment when your love for someone collides with your terror of losing them? It's enough to hollow you out from the inside. I clutched the ring and called his number with shaking fingers. No answer. Again. Straight to voicemail. My heart pounded against my ribs like a desperate fist against a locked door. By dawn I was at his house. Ruth came with me, her cane tapping the pavement like a war drum. When Mark opened the door, alive, whole, still wearing his ring, my knees nearly gave way. He looked confused as I held up the chain and the note. His face drained of color. Mom, that's not mine. I never took this off. He raised his hand, showing the band still tight around his finger. We both stared at the silver circle dangling from the note. Identical to his. Too identical. Vanessa. She had bought a duplicate, knowing what it would do to me. Knowing the terror it would spark. She wasn't just threatening anymore. She was playing with my mind, weaving her cruelty like a spider spinning its web. Mark sank into a chair, his hands buried in his hair. She's gone too far. This isn't just spite anymore. This is obsession. His voice cracked, heavy with shame. Mom, I should have stopped her long ago. I laid the chain on the table between us. It's not too late to stop her now. But you have to decide whose side you're on. Truly. Tears rimmed his eyes. Yours. Always yours. But I don't know how to fight her. She doesn't play fair. I leaned closer, my voice steady. Then we stop playing by her rules. We set our own. And we make her face the one thing she cannot escape, the truth. The next day I went back to the bank. Mr. Hayes raised his brows when I placed the notes, the photographs, and the false ring before him. She's spiraling, he said gravely. If she doesn't stop, she'll drag everyone down with her. He paused, then added, but perhaps we can use her own recklessness against her. We drafted a plan. A meeting, set under the guise of negotiation. A gathering not in my home this time, but in the library, the very place Vanessa believed she had lost to me. Public place, filled with witnesses, filled with history. If Vanessa wanted war, I would make the battleground one where truth echoed louder than lies. Mark was hesitant, but I told him, a lesson unfinished is a curse that repeats. And I won't leave this world cursed. Haven't you ever known you must stand in the storm, not because you want to, but because to step back would mean letting it destroy everyone you love? The night before the meeting, I sat at my desk, writing. My hand ached, but I wrote anyway. Letters for my grandchildren, a statement for the police, and one last entry in the journal I began the day my husband died. In it I wrote, if tomorrow is the day Vanessa brings her final storm, let it be the day she learns storms do not last. But oaks do. The morning came gray again, as if the sky itself remembered the first letter she sent. I dressed in my Sunday best, a navy dress with pearl buttons, and pinned my late husband's watch to my wrist. Not as jewelry but as armor. And as I stepped into the library, the place already buzzing with murmurs and waiting eyes, I knew one truth. By the time the sun set, something would break. Either Vanessa or me. And then the doors opened. She walked in. Eyes blazing. Smiling like she had already won. But she didn't know what was waiting for her. Not yet. Vanessa strode into the library like it was her coronation. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her pride. Heels clicking against the polished floor like gunshots. The whispers of onlookers rippled through the aisles of books, their eyes darting between her and me. She thought the world still belonged to her arrogance, but pride has a way of blinding people right before the fall. Mark stood beside me, shoulders rigid, face pale. He wouldn't look at her, and that silence was louder than any accusation. Ruth sat in the front row, her cane across her lap like a scepter, ready to bear witness. Mr. Hayes shuffled papers at a table, his presence making the whole thing official. The reporter was there too, notebook open, camera ready, eager to capture every flicker of truth. Vanessa smiled as if nothing had happened. "So," she said sweetly, "we're meeting in a library. How poetic. Shall we talk like civilized people, or do you want to stage another performance?" I met her gaze steadily. "No performances today, Vanessa. Just truth. The kind you can't twist with charm or lies." Her smile tightened, but she sat across from me. "Fine. Let's have it then. What new trick do you have up your sleeve?" I nodded to Mr. Hayes, who opened a folder and placed it on the table. "This isn't a trick," I said softly. "This is your reflection." Inside the folder were copies of everything. The letter she'd sent, the photographs of my home, the fake wedding ring she had planted to terrify me, even the notes she thought were hidden from view. Evidence, layer upon layer, each sheet like a mirror showing her the face she had tried to hide. She scanned the papers, her eyes narrowing, her fingers twitching against the table. "These prove nothing," she said, her voice sharp. "You're framing me. Everyone knows you hate me." The reporter's camera clicked. Mark's voice cut through the tension, low and trembling. "She's not framing you, Vanessa. She's saving me. Saving all of us from you." Vanessa turned on him, her face twisting. "You would betray me. After everything I've given you." "What you gave me," Mark said, standing now, his voice shaking but firm, "was a prison. Shame. And a future built on my mother's grave. I'm done pretending that's love." Gasps echoed through the room. Ruth muttered a prayer. The choir ladies exchanged looks like they were watching Judgment Day unfold. And me. I stayed still because sometimes silence lets the truth roar louder. Vanessa's composure cracked, her eyes wild as she scanned the room full of witnesses. She stood abruptly, slamming her hands on the table. "None of this will matter. Do you hear me? You can write your little articles, file your papers, whisper in your pews, but I will not be erased. I will not be discarded like trash." Her voice echoed through the library, bouncing off the shelves lined with stories of lives long past. And in that echo I heard it. Desperation. A woman who had built her future on stolen bricks and now watched the walls collapse. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the table. "Vanessa, listen to me. No one erased you. You erased yourself. Piece by piece, every time you chose greed over gratitude, cruelty over kindness, ambition over love. You killed your own future long before tonight." She shook her head violently, tears streaking her face now, though they looked more like rage than sorrow. "You think you've won, Eleanor. You think this is over. But it's not over until I say it's over." And then, before anyone could stop her, she lunged across the table, grabbing the folder, ripping papers from it, scattering them into the air like confetti. Gasps filled the room as pages fluttered down onto the carpet. She screamed, a raw, animal sound, her crimson dress flashing as she fought like a cornered wolf. Mark rushed forward, catching her wrists, holding her back as she thrashed. Mr. Hayes tried to gather the papers, his hands shaking. Ruth shouted, "Lord, deliver us!" The reporter snapped photo after photo, the chaos immortalized with every flash. I stood tall, unmoving, as Vanessa finally sagged against Mark's grip, panting, her hair wild, her eyes burning with a hatred that chilled the room. And in that silence, I spoke the final truth she needed to hear. "Vanessa, you dared me to die sooner. But I'm still here. And tonight, the only thing buried is your future." Her body went limp. She sagged to her knees, sobbing, not with grief, but with a hollow wail of someone who finally understood they had lost everything. The library doors opened then, and 2 officers stepped in, summoned quietly by Mr. Hayes. They moved forward, calm but firm. One officer bent down. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "you are under investigation for harassment, fraud, and criminal threats. You'll need to come with us." The gasp that tore from her lips was not anger now. It was fear. Cold, unshakable fear. Mark stepped back, tears streaming down his face as they led her away. His ring glinted in the light, still on his hand, still a symbol, but now a broken one. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, the weight of years heavy on my shoulders. The storm was ending. But storms always leave wreckage. And though Vanessa's future was gone, the question still remained. Could my son rebuild his? Because as they led her out the door, she turned her head, eyes locking on me one last time, and spat words that sent a chill racing down my spine. "This isn't the end, Eleanor. I'll come back. I always come back." And I knew then, my fight wasn't finished. Not yet. The library emptied slowly after the officers led Vanessa away. Neighbors whispered in clusters, their voices hushed with both shock and relief. Ruth lingered by my side, her hand resting on my shoulder as if to remind me I was not alone. But as I stood in that grand hall, surrounded by fallen papers and fading echoes, I felt the weight of her final words pressing down. "This isn't the end. I'll come back. I always come back." Carried that weight home with me. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photographs she'd once sent to frighten me, at the false wedding ring meant to break my mind. Symbols of her cruelty. Symbols of my endurance. Haven't you ever realized that the weapons people forge to hurt you can become the very proof of your survival? Mark arrived later, his face hollow, his voice soft. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't know how to face tomorrow. Everything I thought I knew is gone." I took his hand in mine, weathered skin against trembling fingers. "No, Mark. Not everything is gone. You still have a choice. You can build again, but this time build on truth. On character. On the lessons your father and I raised you with." I squeezed his hand gently. "Vanessa may have destroyed her own future, but yours doesn't have to die with it." Tears slid down his cheeks, and in that moment, he looked like the little boy who once clung to my skirts, afraid of the dark. "I'll try," he said. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I'll try." Days turned into weeks. Vanessa remained in custody while the investigation unfolded. Fraud, harassment, criminal threats. The charges stacked like bricks on her shoulders. Some neighbors pitied her, others condemned her. But me. I prayed for her. Not out of softness but out of wisdom. Because bitterness is another kind of poison, and I refused to drink it. One Sunday morning I stood in church, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Ruth sat beside me, humming hymns. Mark was there too, his voice quiet but steady. And as the choir lifted their voices, I felt something shift inside me. The storm had passed. The wreckage remained, yes, but so did the lesson. And that was what mattered most. Because life is not about how quickly we leave this world, but about what we leave behind when we do. Vanessa thought wealth was the legacy worth chasing. She was wrong. The true legacy is integrity, love, and the courage to stand tall when others want to see you fall. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and finished the journal entry I had started the night before the library meeting. My hand moved slowly but firmly across the page. She dared me to die sooner. But I lived. And in living, I proved that cruelty cannot kill character, greed cannot bury dignity, and hatred cannot outlast love. The only thing that died was the future she thought she could steal. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside my husband's Bible. A small smile touched my lips. My story wasn't over, not yet. But if it ended tomorrow, it would end with peace. And so I rose, walked to the garden, and stood among my roses, their blooms bright against the morning sun. The same roses Vanessa once tried to use to frighten me had become my symbol of survival. Haven't you ever noticed that beauty can grow out of the very soil where pain was planted? I breathed deeply, the scent of roses filling my lungs, and whispered to the air, I am still here. Because in the end, that was the lesson I wanted my children, my grandchildren, and anyone who heard my story to remember. No one, not even a bitter daughter-in-law with venom in her veins, gets to write the last chapter of your life. That pen belongs only to you. And with that truth, the curtain fell on Vanessa's schemes. My dignity remained intact, my house still stood, and my family, scarred but healing, found its way back to love. She dared me to die sooner. But I didn't. I lived. And by living I buried her future. Sparkle's life lesson. When people push you toward your grave out of greed or cruelty, don't hand them a shovel. Stand taller. Live louder. And remember, your legacy is not measured in what others take from you, but in what you leave behind that can never be stolen. Your dignity, your truth, your love.